We're going to get us started. Hello, hello. You have everyone there?
Just looking for them. Do you want to?
Yeah, so I'd like to address everybody and just say that any questions that come up for you during the panel discussion for our panelists through the discussion, please type them into the chat, because we're going to have a question and answer period at the end of the chat. And yeah, we will address everything at that time. And here we go. So we just want to thank everyone who is staying on for the panel discussion. And we'd really like to welcome and thank our amazing group of panelists for joining us tonight. It's really important to recognize certain perspectives may be missing from the film, and that it does not necessarily represent the entire picture around agriculture and climate change. And we hope that this panel discussion will help to fill in some of those gaps and offer a more diverse perspective. So without further ado, let's introduce you to our panel.
Okay. So first up, we have Carolyn Puterbough. And Carolyn has worked with the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs since 2009. As an economic development advisor, she works with the agriculture and rural communities to deliver the ministry's programs and services. Carolyn has a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture degree from the University of Guelph, economic development training at the University of Waterloo, and is a trained facilitator. Previously, Carolyn worked as an economic development officer specializing in agriculture development in the city of Kawartha Lakes for 5 years, and as a program coordinator for a nonprofit organization. In her personal life, Carolyn is married and has 3 boys, volunteers with the 4-H program, minor hockey, and with agricultural awareness initiatives. She has been a co-owner of a family farming operation since 2004. So thank you, Carolyn, for joining us. And next up, we have Isaac Crosby. And I apologize, Carolyn's pronouns are she and her. Isaac's pronouns are he and him. And he comes from a small farming community 30 minutes south of Windsor, Ontario, called Harrow, Ontario. He is proud of his Ojibwe Black Canadian heritage and looks forward to sharing their histories. He studied landscape horticulture technician at Humber College and currently leads urban agriculture programming at Evergreen Brickworks, now virtually. He incorporates his education and traditional First Nations farming to grow great crops, to teach others, and to do his part in saving the earth.
Give us a wave, Isaac.
There he is. Thanks for joining us, Isaac. Next up, we have Aliyah Fraser. Her pronouns are she and her. And Aliyah is a new farmer and urban planner based in Kitchener, Ontario. She holds an undergraduate degree in urban planning from the University of Waterloo and has 2 years of experience working as a private land development planner. Earlier this year, she founded Lucky Bug Farm, a small-scale market garden that is set on growing a just and sustainable food system. Give us a wave, Aliyah, just so we know. Yeah, there you are. Thanks again for joining us. And then lastly, we have Owen Goltz. His pronouns are he and him. And Owen began his working career as an arborist, innovator, teacher, and consultant in the body language of trees and its connection to healthy soils. As an early adopter in soil health, Owen left his private practice in 2009 to pursue a childhood dream of becoming a farmer, which led to a far more powerful connection between soil health, plant health, and human health. He and his partner, Susan, currently live and farm with nature on 60 acres in the village of Inglewood. Using the various ecosystems within the farm, Owen has successfully developed an internal nutritional system for his table and farming needs called zero budget natural farming. So Owen, if you could give us a quick wave. Thank you so much for joining us.
So we are going to put everybody's websites up in the chat very shortly so you can check them out. But we want to get right into the conversation. So This film is based in the USA, but we will be speaking really from a Canadian lens here. And it's important to note that there is a long history of modern science and environmental movements co-opting Indigenous traditional ecological knowledge. Things like permaculture are branded as new practice, but in reality, the fundamentals of permaculture trace back to practices that have been used in by Indigenous peoples all over the globe for thousands of years. And today we'd really like to start off the discussion asking each panelist to share with us what their relationship is to soil and the land. And Carolyn, if you would be so kind to get us started.
For sure. So thank you for having me tonight. So with my relationship with the land, with my role at OMAFRA, I work with organizations and communities who are looking on how they can support agriculture in a better way. So I'm not a technical specialist and from a soil health perspective or a climate change perspective or any of those things. So I just want to sort of clear that up. But I think on the land, my personal connection is really because I have a farming background. I own a farm. My family has farmed since, they came to Canada initially, but way back in the 1800s, first to York region, and then moving to with the airport, the federal buying of airport land. And, with that long-term type of approach, we look at the land serving us for a long time. It's not just a one season thing or even that season a message that was in the film. It's much longer than that because it's many generations after the other, and looking at how we can support agriculture both from a soil perspective and as a business perspective. And we're a farm that does crop rotation and sting, and we grow forages as well as field crops, and we look at how to improve the soil through what we do, as well as my personal life, a garden with lots of things where I do use lots of tillage in that garden to try to control the weeds and not have to use anything else. So it was that would be my relationship with the soil. It's a daily I'm lucky enough to be really involved in agriculture, both in my work life and in my personal life.
Carolyn. And Isaac, if you could please tell us a little bit about your relationship to land and soil.
All right. Well, can you hear me? Awesome. All right. So once again, my name is Isaac Crosby. I come from the Ojibwa of Anderden, from southwestern Ontario. We are Indigenous farmers. We still have our homestead. We still farm to this day. So my connection to the soil, to the land, is a deep connection, a deep-rooted connection, actually. Hence one of my names, Ganyanggawe, he who has deep roots. I know that there's no life without it. We cannot grow without it. At Brickworks, I do I call it Indigenous urban agriculture. So what I do is I combine Indigenous agricultural techniques to take care of the land. So using three sisters and using companion planting, stuff like that, and using the permaculture. I don't call it permaculture. I just call it helping the earth, right? Because it basically comes from us. We need to, when I look at the soil and look at what my connection to it, we need to realize that in the springtime, when Mother Nature is growing, when she is coming alive, that our soil is full of life. And at the same time, it means that Mother Earth is pregnant. She is pregnant with life in that soil. So we should tread lightly. Because within Indigenous cultures, within my culture, we talk about how the creepy crawlers and the things we cannot see are all connected to our life cycle. We are all connected to it. So my connection to the soil is that we are connected. Without soil, there's no healthy crops. Without soil, no healthy crops and no healthy people. I mean, we're kind of seeing that now in our society, are we not? Okay, that's it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Isaac. And then we'll ask Aliyah if you could speak a little bit to that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Isaac. I love that perspective a lot. My connection to the land and the soil is interesting because I don't think it's a traditional one. So kind of without meaning to, I chose two career paths that are really heavily, dependent on land. Urban planning is all about how land, changes and evolves from one use to another. And farming is about, cultivating plants and, very fruitful crops from seed to harvest. So kind of just, for me, the connection is looking at these two ends of the spectrum, the really like urban, hardscape, concrete, condominium development side of things, and trying to connect that with the, with regenerative agriculture, with soil health, and with farming, in order to grow food for my community and food that is relevant to my community. And I'm also just been a food lover my whole life. It's probably not a connection to land or soil, but that's where food comes from. So I feel like not a lot of people, maybe not a lot of people, but it's interesting to me the amount of people who also love food, but are missing that connection to how does this food get grown, who grows it, where does it come from, and how does it get from there to in front of me in the grocery store. So I guess my relationship is still changing and still developing and still evolving, but yeah, it's pretty fun.
Yeah, that's a very good point about food, and sort of sometimes people disconnect with the land that it comes from. And to end with Owen, could you let us know a little bit about your relationship with the soil and land?
Sure. Yeah. Can you hear me this time? Okay, perfect. So I'm kind of older than most of these people here. So I started really young, walking in the woodlots when I was just a kid with my grandfather, and we'd walk through a forest, and he would show me what was good and bad and so forth. And I always wanted to be a farmer, but I really couldn't get there. Even though farming has been in our family for quite a few generations, it just wasn't in my cards. So the closest thing I could get to farming was through trees. And it was realizing that as practicing arboriculture, as I realized that a lot of our symptoms that we were treating with chemical sprays were just basically, I guess we were just more of making the trees a junkie on our services. And it was that kind of led me to get out of the tree care industry. And I started to realize that trees had a really specific body language, and they told us a tremendous amount of history about what they were doing and how they're growing. And I realized that one of the connections was missing was this understanding of soils. And I, at the time, was very frustrated with the tree care industry because they weren't really receptive to my way of thinking. And I thought, well, what the heck, I'll become a farmer, because how hard can it be to be a farmer? And I always wanted to be a farmer. And it's really through that my connections with soils have really changed, almost to a spiritual component to it. And it's realizing before you can really love something, you really need to see the beauty in it. And what I really started to realize is that there was a tremendous amount of beauty within the ground that we were walking on, the work that we were doing in our soils. And having a little bit of an understanding with that really drew me to understanding how to grow good crops. And I guess from that perspective, it really was starting to look at this powerful thing they call photosynthesis. It was really made me look back in history to understand what was happening. It really made me look to the vibrational energy within the soils and within the plants, and how that affects nutrition and attraction of insects and so forth. And so that was really what became the backbone of my second career. And I kind of wish that I had this start to my career before I went into tree care, because I think both of them would have been just an amazing complement. So that's basically where I'm coming from a soil perspective.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I really loved that point from the film about, if you love something and you love someone, that you really want to understand it and you want to get to know it, right? And so that's really why we asked everyone about their relationship to land and soil, because that's really the base point from where we begin any change. So everyone has a relationship to land and soil, and whether we're aware of it or not. So for the audience, we'd love to hear about whether you guys have any relationships with the soil and the land. So if you want to share in the chat, that would be fantastic as well. But thank you everyone for sharing those stories with us. So this film really highlights some of the barriers and the opportunities around climate action in the United States. And we're really interested to hear about, hear from our panelists and recognize some of the barriers and opportunities for climate action here, right here in Canada. So we'd like to know if they differ from those in the States, and hear from each of your personal experiences and lenses. So Aliyah, can I get you started? Could you share with us some barriers or opportunities that come from your perspective as a urban planner as well as a farmer?
Yeah, I think something that the movie, I don't think it meant to do this, but something that the movie did and something that I noticed is that there were not very many faces, Black and brown faces, in the movie portrayed as experts.
Mhm.
So throughout the movie, we hear from a ton, like a slew of experts. We hear from celebrities who, I don't know if we should call those experts, but we hear from a lot of people. We hear from farmers, and we heard from one Black woman that I saw. And when we did hear from her, it was very short, maybe 1 minute to 30 seconds of her speaking about her passion and about, what she does. And I think one thing that really stopped me from seeing myself as a farmer at first was the lack of representation in agriculture for Black women specifically. And so that was a huge barrier. And it wasn't until I saw Cheyenne doing it, Cheyenne Sundance of Sundance Harvest, who I'm sure a lot of us know. It wasn't until I saw her doing it that I saw myself represented in agriculture. So that's the biggest barrier that stood out to me. And I also think another thing that the movie kind of didn't really touch on as much as it maybe should, even though I'm sure the filmmakers would say that that wasn't the focus of the movie, is how, these forces of prejudice and bigotry and all these things play into the system that we have now, play into an industrialized agricultural system. And so, yeah, maybe not the most on topic response, but I think not having a full understanding of these issues and of the system we're in really kind of shuts people down before they get started.
Absolutely. And no, that's perfectly on topic, because we just want to hear from your perspective. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing that and pointing out, so many of those things that Marissa and I also noticed from the film. I wanted to turn this question over to Owen as a regenerative agriculture farmer. What do you find are some of the barriers or opportunities for you in terms of climate action and taking action?
Well, there's a lot of things. I guess the biggest barrier I find right now is that nutritional food has not been really well recognized within society. I mean, we talk about plant-based foods and we talk about, but not really nutritional, nutrient dense. And I guess there's always these two answers: what comes first, the chicken or the egg? And so what comes first? Is it climate change or is it healthy food? And we have a lot of people to feed. And so I see we need, as a society, regardless of where you come from, where your economics is, we need to start making a connection between healthy food and healthy people. And that really relates back to healthy soils. And I see that connection being really, really important in this regenerative egg, because our food system, our quality of our food is reducing itself. And if we have to feed more people, do we need to make more food, or do we need to make more food, more nutrition, so we eat less, so there's less calories? So, and my kind of thing is that and the only way I know how to get nutritional food is really paying attention to soils. You can't really do it through industrial agriculture, even in a vegetable perspective. Yes, you can reach some level of of success, but to get truly healthy food, you need to really pay attention to the soil. So I see that as one of the big barriers. Our biggest barrier that we face is that I live in an area where there's 35 grocery stores, there's 7 farmers markets within 25 miles or 25 minutes. And as a result, I'm facing a lot of competition. And I always say the word convenience is the hardest thing that we deal with. It's just when you go to the grocery store, oh, I'm just going to pick up something for tonight. Oh, there's some head of lettuce. I'll just pick up that, rather than maybe thinking about the guy at the end of the driveway. So there's lots of areas when it comes to barriers. I belong to the National Farmers Union, so we hear about access to lands and so forth. So I'll just leave it at that point and see where it goes. But I could speak for another 5 minutes on that. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Owen. And then we'll just turn the mic over to Carolyn now and to answer this question about barriers and opportunities, both from your perspective as a farmer, but also from a government and policy lens.
Yeah, so from sort of that policy or government lens, some of the barriers or challenges you see, in particular with when you think about what was in the movie, is we've seen a shift in Ontario to more annual crops. So, going to more like less perennial crops. So less hay, less alfalfa, less things that are in the ground for more than 1 year, which really results in you're having less rotation as a whole in crop rotation. You're seeing, and this kind of blows my mind because our farm has been no-till for a lot of years, but like the move to more tillage, which I was surprised by that. I actually went to check stats after watching the movie because I thought the movie was like, I'm like, well, that can't be right. That's not what I know. But then, I like to back my perceptions up with data, and I was like, oh, it actually has increased. What I see, like particularly in that near Toronto area, is there's less and less livestock. So like the type of agriculture that's talked about in that movie, like show there's less ruminant culture in particular. There's smaller fields, the fence rows are being taken out to merger fields. So those are all the challenges, and you see bigger and bigger equipment being used, which then has compaction and those sorts of things. So those are some of the challenges. I see some of the opportunities I see some communities who are taking leadership roles and looking at, climate change mitigation and adaptation. It really needs to be local, I think, or there needs to be local as well as sort of that approach, because a solution that might work in my community doesn't necessarily work in a remote or a rural community. Even some of the things in the movie, my thought when he was talking about, I can rotate my cattle all years around. I'm like, well, how do you get a hairdryer to thaw the water bowl in the pasture? Like how do you keep the water thawed in February? So those are the sorts of things that I think about, is so that adaptation that works in your particular area. But I think there is lots of opportunities as well. One of the things when you look at the stats is cover crops is really increasing as a whole of agriculture in Ontario. So you're seeing that, and even the most conventional farmers, I see them planting cover crops as a way to protect their soil during the winter months after they harvest. So those are some of the opportunities I see as well.
Absolutely. I love what you said about the local context being really important. I think that's such a key point. And then lastly, Isaac, is there more that you would like to add to that, looking at climate action and the barriers and then opportunities, both as a grower and someone who works with the community?
Okay, now how do you unpack this? So first two things actually, corporate greed and not enough representation for people of color, not enough at all. How do I unpack this one? We have like the barriers, just the barriers themselves, just the fact that we had only one person, well, a few people of color in this movie, And when the Detroit people came forward to talk about their thing, what they're doing in Detroit, it basically, to me, came like, okay, so this is her, she's supposed to come around, she's doing comedy, she's being sassy, she has her minute and 30 seconds. This is all you get from a marginalized community who's actually turned Detroit around, right? If you're gonna look at taking care of the climate and taking care of soil, look at what they did in Detroit, right? Focus on them. But at the same time, I understand when I'm watching this movie, like, oh, okay, I get what you're doing. This movie is really being focused towards a lot more Caucasian people than anybody else. This is what I see in a movie. Because as I realized, it is within them that we have to get them to where we are within the Indigenous community when it comes to taking care of the earth. We're trying to get everyone where we are. We're already there. We've been taking care of this earth for a long time. We just had a hiccup for the past 400 or 500 years. That's all we had. And now we're back, right? And just like the people in Africa, the same thing. They just had a hiccup. Now they're back doing their thing. And when I saw after the first time to watch this movie, I was like, oh, geez, very Eurocentric. Then I went, I see what you're doing. You're putting the solution back into, unfortunately, the people who helped make the problem into their ancestors. So they are there to showcase, okay, now people, we're farming, we did this, we got to do something different. But they should have had within that movie way more Native American representation when it comes to taking care of the land over here. Because to tell you right now, there would have been less cows, way less cows. They're not from over here at all. Corporate greed and low funding is another barrier. I mean, corporations are still greedy when it comes to taking care of the earth. They are doing a lot more greenwashing than what we realize, especially when they're giving out funding for any of these projects, right? Certain limitations within funding that I see when I'm at Brickworks with our funding. Last barrier is fear. Fear to try something that is not really new, but it's really old, because we have been brainwashed for the longest time to think that, oh, if it doesn't have that perfect look, or if the soil doesn't have that chemical in it, that it's not going to work. Guess what? We can use Mother Nature. We can use certain things in the nature to take the place of Roundup and stuff like that. It just takes a little bit longer, that's all. But we can do it. Okay, I'm off my soapbox.
No, that was amazing. Thank you so much, Isaac. I think, yeah, all of your points really help to bring a fuller perspective and fuller picture than what the film showed on its own. So I really appreciate that. And so we've looked at our relationships to the land and the barriers and the opportunities that we face with climate action. Let's continue the conversation with what programs and resources and supports are out there and available to us to mitigate climate change.
So Owen, you're the president of the NFU, the National Farm Union, Local 305 group. Can you share with us a glimpse into what programs and supports the NFU provides to farmers for mitigating climate change? I have been hearing about the NF University courses on climate change. Can you speak to some of those programs that you might be familiar with? We can't hear you.
And I think we.
There you go.
Oh, there you go. Okay, hold on.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, there's one correction. I just stepped down from that role as president. So we have a new one who just took over just about last 2 weeks ago. So, but the NFU, I guess, is a pretty good organization. So I was the president of Local 305, which encompasses York, GTA, Peel region. We are it's farmer oriented, basically. So it's really driven by farmers, but we have memberships available. And the word eludes me, but they're like associate members, and anybody can be an associate member. But the NFU really looks at policy across, not just Ontario, but across the United States. So it's looking at how to make farmers, give farmers opportunities for access to land if you're a new farmer. It looks at working at farm labor. How do we make migrant workers, give them just causes and support them in their working in Ontario farms. The NFU was really supporting and against these MZOs, the ministerial zoning orders, which we find is really unfair. We're really looking to expanding the green belt, and so there's programs to help with that. We're totally against the building of Highway 413 because it's not only going to go across the green belt, but it's really destroying a lot of really high quality farmland. As you know, we have a local food advocacy. So we're involved with a group in Toronto right now, but we could easily get involved with York region about contacting farmers with people that are in economic problems, people of color, doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter what your situation is, trying to get them with healthy food and connecting with farmers. So for example, this year we had a group come out to our farm from the St. James co-op or community, and they came and helped us plant 3,000 garlics. And it was a great opportunity for me to understand where they're coming from all different walks of life. This area, for example, has that came out, they have 145 different languages in their community. So just a huge perspective. And it's really good for us because I work out at my farm. A lot of farmers really don't get a lot of direct contact with people from the city, and there's a real disconnect. So it was a good opportunity for us to reconnect our concerns as well as their concerns and get a different perspective. We have a huge, NFU has a huge climate action project. If you really want to look at, they made this incredible book called Tackling the Farm Crisis. And you have to realize that 95% of all farmers, doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter what kind of farming you do, 95% of your revenue goes back into inputs in Canada. And only 5% doesn't. And we're one of those 5%. And how that deals with climate change. So they did a massive report on that, which I think everybody should read. And it is a free thing that you can look on their website. I will give you their website. We're looking at how do we get land access guides. So how do we get young farmers the opportunity to get their first piece of land, whether it's may not be able to buy it for the first time, but at least get their hands in the dirt. So there's a lot of farms like myself who are having community plots where we take on people from downtown Toronto or wherever they are, whatever their needs are. And there's other farms in the GTA reason for doing that. You know, a simple thing is trying to protect the swallows. Barn swallows are now an endangered species, but they're really, really important part. And there's a survey about that as well. So another huge one is saving our seeds. There's no question for farmers who want to keep going in this. This year is a perfect example of there's some seed shortages. We've been growing our own seeds on our own farm for the last 3 years, and we know that the quality of seeds increases when we reuse and regrow our own seed year after year. It starts to adapt to our soils, it adapts to our climate, and we have stronger, healthier, and better quality produce. So. And then we have I'm kind of tossed on this one on supply management, but I would really recommend that if you're a farmer on this, that you try to join. We are always looking for new members. You have to realize that we're one of the smallest local 305 because we have most of our land in the GTA is rented land and owned by developers. There isn't too many actual farmers left in the York region. There are some, but we could use any kind of support. And if you're not a farmer, then I encourage you to look us up and maybe become an associate member. And I think we're looking for a new secretary or a treasurer. So anybody with some financial ability would be great. So that's just a small thing. Look on our website. Fantastic. I'll put it in the chat and you can look at everything that we can do. So that's just one organization. So
thank you so much. And I was just going to say, well, we should put that up in the chat so that everybody can see. So yeah. I appreciate that you're going to do that. And we're going to ask Carolyn if you can share some of the programs that OMAFRA offers to promote for farmers to mitigate climate change. Like, for example, the environmental farm plan is a program that farm families can participate in to increase their environmental awareness in up to 23 different areas on their farm. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this and maybe some other resources.
Sure, yeah. So the environmental farm plan is a great example. That program actually has been around. So I see in the chat somebody said how long, or what's being done to get the government on board. Well, it's been around since 1993. It was actually a program that has been adopted worldwide since its development within Ontario. And the Ontario government partners with the federal government to provide funding towards implementing some of those actions. So, on a farm, you can assess what your environmental risks might be, and from that, develop an action plan. And then there's some activities that have funding associated with them. So, for example, almost always one of the most popular categories with the environmental farm plan is the reduced tillage category. And in 2020, there was, I think I looked it up, 622 apps and 373 of them were funded. Cover crops was the second most funded category within the environmental farm plan. There's another program called the Species at Risk Farm Incentive Program, and it's a program that'll help encourages essentially you're making habitat adjustments to be able to encourage species at risk. So there's things like, and some of the things that when I think relate back to the films, so things like nature tree or native grass planting or cross fencing for rotational grazing, those are eligible through that particular program, erosion control type measures as well. But what we found over the years of the environmental farm plan is, for whatever portion might be funded through government funding, there's way more invested by the farmers themselves into the practices to the support and the environmental farm plan. Just a couple of other things. I have one of the ladies I work with in my office. She's actually the grazier and forager specialist for the province. Her name's Christine O'Reilly. This is her space, when you're talking about regenerative agriculture and grazing and forage. And she talked about, there's the Ontario Forage Council. They had a whole session on educating farmers about carbon credits and how they participate in it. She said the Manitoba Forage Council, they're in their 4th year of a regenerative agriculture conference and talking about best practices on that side of things. So I think that staff support or that expertise is also available as well. And then just, I think it was last month, or I guess maybe 2 months ago in February, Ontario released it's called New Horizons. It's the Ontario Soil Health Strategy, which NFU was one of the contributing organizations, along with many other farm organizations. So that lays out some of those real needs that are required to help support healthy soil in Ontario as it moves forward. And one of the things that sticks out when I read that is good, like even our soil mapping in Ontario. It's really old. When people come into my office, when I used to be in my office every day and they wanted to buy the soil map, like I'm literally pulling out an artifact to sell them for $12. And when I fold the map out, right? So to make good decisions, you need good data. So we need better data in Ontario about our soils. And then because I see you just shaking your head, I'm going to mention land use as well. So this is where I fit a lot of the time is Ontario has adopted something called an ag systems approach within the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And what that approach is, it's melding land use planning with economic development and asking municipalities within that Greater Golden Horseshoe area, when they're planning for agriculture, they're planning for a systems approach. So they're not just looking at it from simply a land use perspective. So protecting the land is important, but also looking at it how to make it a vibrant, support a vibrant agricultural sector. And that's where I fit in. That I work with communities to talk about how can you support an agricultural community? What can you do? Is it allowing zoning so you can have farmers markets in urban areas, or have space so people can grow food close to where they live? All those sorts of those places. And the province has taken over the role of identifying where prime agricultural land is within those Greater Golden Horseshoe area, from where it used to be. Each community, essentially through their land use planning, would identify that. So those are some of the things the province has done to support climate change and protecting agricultural land, which is, goes back to that soil piece. Sorry, that
Wow.
was longer than 2 minutes.
Yeah, no, but that was a lot of information, a lot of resources that you provided, and we will be sharing those out in a follow-up email after the chat. We'll make sure to include all the links that everybody has been speaking of, so that you can go for it, so that all the participants can check those things out. So thank you for sharing that. So before we move on to the next question, we just wanted to give Aliyah and Isaac an opportunity to jump in with any thoughts or resources that that might have popped up for you while we were having this discussion. So please, yes, okay, Isaac.
Okay, so resources. How about connecting with Indigenous growers and Indigenous farmers, or we call each other earth helpers or earth workers. We kind of know this land, and we kind of need to have a voice at this table, big time. Because like I said before, we've been doing it for a long time, just for the past 400 or 500 years. We had a little blip in the system. Now we're going back to where we should have been. So it'd be great to include more Indigenous voices in the topics, and more Black and people of color voices as well, to get a broader spectrum of what we're doing. We've had ones in Canada from most Indigenous voices, then reach out and go throughout the world, because we all know the world is here in Canada already. So let's use our resources, which is people.
Thank you. Absolutely.
Mine is pretty much on the same vein. Listen to, talk to, follow on all the social medias, Indigenous and Black voices in the agricultural space. Since we are here at a movie night, I thought I would recommend another movie along the same lines as this one, which is called Gather. It is a great movie about Indigenous food systems in the United States as well, but just a more realistic approach of the issues, and yeah, just a really cool perspective.
Wonderful. We just added that link right into the chat, so people can have a look at that.
Yeah. Awesome recommendation. Thanks, Leah. All right, so our next question is directed to Isaac and Aliyah. The film is obviously just a glimpse into regenerative agriculture and land-based work in the United States, but it really misses a lot of perspectives, especially from marginalized communities who are often most impacted by things like climate change. So I'm just wondering if either of you could speak to what other components and stories do you think are important to the narrative of regenerative agriculture and really land-based work. Yeah, whoever wants to start.
I'm going to tell Isaac to go first.
Sure, I'll go first. All right, let me get on the soapbox again. Let me do what I do. So, y'all know what I'm gonna say. What's missing from this movie? Indigenous voices, Black voices. And I'm gonna say this, especially Black voices that are descendants of slaves on North America. Because for the past 400 or 500 years, I'll say 400 years, let's get started from 1619, we and the Native people, we have all been the caretakers of this earth. And Black people being the descendants of slaves, they were the farmers. They were the gardeners. They did all that work. They worked alongside the Indigenous cultures. So they have this knowledge that is basically kept hidden, because nobody approaches, nobody seems like they want to hear our stories. They think that we should just be consumers and that's it. But we are not, we're producers. We produce a lot. So the missing narrative is always going to be the people of color voices. Where's our voice in this? Let's look at what we have to offer at this table. And not a rectangular or square table. This is a round table. So we each have equal opportunity to speak and to be heard. So if we can lift that, I mean, now that I've heard of this movie called Gather, I'm all over that, right? We need more of that. We need more telling the story of what we are doing to save this planet, to save this earth. Because not all brown and Black people are out there being fashion people, out there in the music industry. There are those of us who are working this land to make sure that it's around for the future generations. And on that note, I will get off my soapbox.
But I love your soapbox so much, Isaac. Yeah, I would just add on to that by saying, yes, Black and brown voices of, you know, people who are middle class, but in particular, the voices of migrant workers and the voices of people who are low income, who are disabled, and who are experiencing multiple intersecting identities that are marginalized. So it is great for people who are able to afford land, that they, you know, farm it in a way that is regenerative and, you know, holistic and good for the planet. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think we need to look deeper into what is going to create a truly just, and justice means giving Indigenous people their land back, and sustainable food system in the long run. And so I think taking stock of the system as it currently is, and the voices within the system who are the least heard typically, and whose work is made the most invisible, I think that's really important, because I don't think that this film touched at all on, you know, the reliance that a lot of Canadian and American industrial farms have on migrant workers from Mexico, from Jamaica, from the Caribbean. And so it's really important that I think a lot of times when I bring up race, or when other people of color bring up race, it's like, okay, now we're talking about race, and what does this have to do with anything? And it's like, the people who grow and pick your food and prepare it to be presented to you in the grocery store are Black and brown. The majority of them were not born here and do not live here, you know, 100% of the year. So it's really important to me that everyone is able to see the food system for what it is, and that involves looking at race, and it is often uncomfortable, but that doesn't make it any less important and vital work to do.
Amazing, thank you. Yeah, and I think like it's interesting to see from the film, like Isaac, you were saying, it showcases this issue actually, the film itself being made, right? The way they went to Zimbabwe, they went to Uganda, they went to Haiti, and they didn't speak to anyone from there, right? So yeah, I really appreciate you guys bringing that up, and obviously more voices of people who aren't usually heard. I appreciate that. Marissa, you've got the next question.
Yes, well, actually, I just wanted to say, like, there is so much ground to cover here from this film, but I want to keep us on track. I know that we're already at 8:25. We said that this would go to 8:30. We do have our amazing panelists that have agreed to stay on a little bit longer, so we really appreciate it, because we do want to get to some questions from the participants. We do have one last question for you, and if you could just let's see. I'm saying we've learned a lot about what farmers can do in order to heal the soil and heal the planet. But if you could just choose one thing or one action where you feel consumers, community members, and activists can be most impactful, we'd really appreciate that you share that thing, and then we'll open the floor to everybody else who might have questions, because we definitely want those voices heard as well. So maybe Owen, if we can start with you. I'm putting you on the spot.
One thing I could change. I don't know if there's anything I would change. Yeah, I just think that there's a real disconnect in agriculture from rural and farmers, and there's a lot of topics in there that probably, I think a lot of people get painted with one brush, and I think before we start judging people, you really need to understand where they're coming from, whether they're white, Black, Italian, or whatever they are. And you know, both my wife and I are 5th generations here on this farm, and so we have a lot of history. good and bad. And from an agricultural perspective, I think the thing for us is even though my great grandmother was a Cree Indian, it really is trying to leave this farm in a much better position than we originally found it. And I think that if we can do that by looking at nature and touching nature and understanding the language of nature, regardless of where you come from, and really start looking forward. I know that we've made a lot of mistakes in the past, but the reality is you can't keep looking at the past because you can't go backwards. You got to go forwards, and it's really hard to drive forward if you're always looking backwards. So we need to be aware of our mistakes, yes, but we also need to look at a really bright future. I have a tremendous amount of faith in humanity that we're going to pull this out of the hat, and all of us have to do our bit to get there. And there are going to be some changes for everybody. So from I don't know if that's answering your question. I guess I'm just, sometimes I feel like a little bit of the underdog here, but it's just about really touching the soil, touching nature, touching trees, regardless of who you are and where you come from. And I think that will save everything in the planet. If you eat crappy food, they're going to be poor people. It doesn't matter what color you are. It doesn't matter where you come from. If you're not eating healthy food, you're not going to be healthy people. And healthy minds comes from healthy food. And we need to start eating healthy food. So.
Okay, thanks so much, Owen. Maybe Isaac?
Okay, wow. What should people do? We got to start learning how to do it ourselves, y'all. That's what it's about. We can't rely on our governments to do it for us, because as we know, you can tell right now, a lot of them are too in bed with the corporate greed. We got to start doing it ourselves with our communities, with our small scale farming, small scale earth helping, and seek out the knowledge that you don't know. Seek it out, seek it out, seek it out, and just be willing to struggle in the beginning. Let's be real about this. It's going to be hard because we are so comfortable being reliant on certain things. Let's be real. It's going to be hard in the beginning, but guess what? You can get through it. Just keep your eye on the prize, live in the now, and work towards that goal. That's it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Isaac. And we're going to present that to Carolyn as well. If you can choose one action, if you could share that with us.
I think for me, it would be, and I think it echoes a lot of what Owen said as well, is make those efforts to build understanding of soil health and soil management between consumers and the general public. And I think one of the easiest ways to do that is to connect with your food locally, whether that's buying it locally at a farmer's market or through a CSA or wherever, because there's what 2% of farmers in all of Canada versus the other 90%. So consumers as a whole have very little opportunities to ever talk to farmers, understand what farmers do, why they do it. So I think understanding the importance of soil health through the farmers you work with is important. And in the end, similar to what Isaac just said, is one of the best ways to make this happen is to make practices that are rewarding the soil profitable for the farmer, because then it's sustainable for them as well. And when I talked to my coworker, my friend today about, what sort of things you need, she goes, well, harvesting forages in a field is really expensive. You have to drive over it a lot of times. So, to cut the hay, to bale the hay, to rake the hay and all those things. So if you can harvest it in a different way, it saves money for the farmer. But unless the farmer can tell that story some way, the person buying doesn't know that. So it's just being able to make those connections where you can and tell the story, I think can really help to make it sustainable in the long term.
Thank you, Carolyn. And last but not least, Aliyah, If you'd like to share what action you feel can be taken, we appreciate that.
Everyone kind of stole my ideas, so sorry if I'm repeating a lot of them. But okay, so I broke it down. I have, for consumers, I would say, don't just think about buying local and organic. That's great, but look for people who use fair labor practices and are using regenerative and low-till growing methods. For community members, connect with your food system. Don't like, it's hard for me to say like stop going to the grocery store, but just reframe your relationship with the grocery store, because it's not a place that's evil and awful and doesn't have any good. It obviously serves a really amazing purpose, but we need to rethink how we interact with them and what they give to us and what we give to them in return, kind of thing. For activists, look to those in your community who are most marginalized, connect with them, amplify their voices, and amplify their needs. And for government, like Carolyn and Isaac said, if regenerative, fair, just sustainability, if this is what we want to see, then it needs to be profitable. Like, as long as we're operating in and under capitalism, the profit is going to drive people's decision making. And so if we want if we want things to be sustainable, they have to be profitable. I think that's it.
Oh, that's amazing. I loved how you touched on all of those individually, because that really gives people actionable steps, actionable pieces to walk away with. So we so appreciate everybody's insights and perspectives and resources that they've shared. And right now we're going to open the floor to our question and answer. And we're going to pass the mic over to Betty, who has been tracking all of our questions, and we'll share the questions from the chat with all of our panelists. Betty, are you on?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Another 10 minutes.
Yeah, we're going to do about another 10 or 15 minutes before we shut down. So if we can try and keep our answers short and sweet, maybe we'll address one panelist with one question at a time, or however it works better. I don't know how many questions there are. Betty?
I've got about 7, 8, I'd say.
Okay. Okay, wonderful.
Some are comments, but I think they're worth sharing. So Marie King, just from a very local question, she has a community garden spot, and she wants to know what she should add to her bucket, her plastic pail, to liquefy something liquid that she could add to her vegetable plot. So anybody willing to answer that question?
I think
She's looking for.
also, Isaac, I think this is the only time I'm going to be able to say that I love your Fresh Air segment on CBC Radio so much. I know. I had to throw it in there. I think what this person is looking for is like a compost tea situation.
Okay.
And so if that is the case, something that I like to do that's really simple is to just save all of your banana peels, depending on what your garden needs, save all of your banana peels and soak them in water, and then take that water and water your garden with it. And you can do these with other vegetables too, that are high in the nutrient that you're looking for or that your garden needs.
Okay.
That's a good one.
You know what? We do. It works really good for us, but we go to about 5 or 6 different ecosystems on the farm that are showing really good health. And we just take a shovel full of dirt. And we take that shovel full of dirt and we take it back into a pail and we put it in the dirt into like a fine mesh bag, and we just wash it out into the pail. And you can use that almost immediately. And that's how we inoculate most of our seeds. And if you want to leave it a little bit longer, add some molasses. We use maple syrup because we're trying to cut down on our budget. If anything sugary will work. And then I would recommend that as we have a system where it waters right in at seeding, even behind a push seeder. So this really is full of incredible biology. It really makes your seeds jump out of the ground really quickly. I highly recommend it for any gardener, especially at the beginning. And then you can do it later on in the season, and it's just going to regenerate all the biology in that soil that's been missing over the last couple of years or whatever you've been doing tilling. So simple.
Great. Thanks, Owen. And Aliyah, So Michael just made a comment that about the grazing, that apparently in Calgary, there's grazing going on in Calgary parks by goats. So not just cows are doing that job, or chickens. Jane had a comment that the time to bring up this push for government support for regenerative farming is during election seasons. So I guess she's just reminding all of us that when election time's coming around, ask candidates, you know, what are you doing about regenerative farming, and make them aware that it's important. Joan was asking about funding sources that have supported. So I think we did cover that through the questions. But if there's anything specific about funding sources for people who want to do some regenerative farming or agriculture, anybody have another thing to add to that?
To start this farm this year, I got a small grant from Carrot Cash. So depending on the scale that I'll link it in the chat. So depending on the scale of growing that you're trying to do, you know, who you are, because they do prioritize people they do prioritize BIPOC. And depending on the type of growing you do, Carrot Cash is a really great reference and resource. So that's my funding source.
Okay. Anybody else? No. Okay, I'll go to the. Hasneen had a comment about how it was actually a beautiful comment up in the chat if anyone wants to go back and look at it, but just saying how taking care of soil, soil is a natural therapy, and that it's a beautiful manifestation of life. So I just like how he put that together in a thought. Debbie was mentioning that some organic farmers would still choose to till because it would get rid of the weeds. So a question that I had brought up to her was that, is it possible by overseeding healthy cover crops, would that also take care of weeds? So if someone could answer Debbie's question.
Can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay, good. So yeah, cover crops is pretty cool. We interseed with carrots and stuff. Like for example, when we start our carrots, after they get about 3 to 4 inches high, then we'll put a red clover in. And that is an amazing legume that helps the carrots grow. Weeds are usually indication. There's a great book called If Weeds Could Talk. They really are probably a fairly good indicator of what you're missing in your soils. Weeds are our friends. We don't pull any weeds in our gardens. We actually cut them off at the base. We try to keep the roots in. It's much easier for us to chop them off at the roots rather than pull the weeds out, which disturbs the soil. So no-till in vegetables is a little bit more challenging than conventional farming. There is some tillage that has to go in, but we try to do it in that top 1 to 2 inches of the soil. I don't know if that helps, but intercropping is great with cover crops.
Okay. Did anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I have to say cover crops.
Do you have any preferred cover crops that you would recommend?
I love clovers.
Yeah.
I love clovers. So I always spread clover seeds on my beds at Evergreen Brickworks. And I totally lost my train of thought. Oh my goodness, that's not good. Oh, where'd my brain go? Weeds, plants behaving badly. Quick thing to the big thing about fertilizer. At Brickworks, what I do with my plants behaving badly, I make sure that I use them as fertilizer. I just chop them up, put them in cheesecloth, put them in rainwater, a little bit of molasses, let them sit for 12 to 24 hours, and use that water and use that as liquid fertilizer on my plants. So there's use for the weeds, are, as I say, plants behaving badly.
Okay, it goes back to Owen's idea of collecting and putting it into the liquid, into the water. Okay, there was still Fran. She was saying, what is getting the government to promote? How can we get the government to promote and fund healthy soil farming? So I know this did come up. More ideas?
Well, yeah. So if you look at the Ontario healthcare bill, Ontario healthcare spends $64 billion a year on healthcare, and if you think about that, and the agricultural bill in Ontario, the provincial and the federal, I think is around 3.1 billion, but I'm not 100% sure on that. So I think that what we need to do is we need to make this there's this huge disconnect, or not this huge connection, that if we can start producing healthy food, and there's tons of studies out there that if you just give one family one meal, like a full-fledged, full real food, I don't call it plant-based, because plant-based is I think a tricky word right now, but real food, once a week, you can reduce the travel to the emergency room by 10%. Now, to me, we have a real disconnect when we're spending $64 billion on our healthcare system and only 3.1 billion in our ag system. So I would love to see a 500,000 or 1% of the healthcare bill go back into some type of regenerative agriculture, whether it's cover crops or whatever. So that's my. So you gotta bring it to their attention.
Yeah, that's the prevention part, right? If you have the healthy food. Yep. Anybody else want to add to that?
No,
But just
nothing
to
add.
go back to what I shared on the environmental farm plan, that it is a program that is available, though it does get it gets fully used every single year, in my experience.
Yeah, Joan was just commenting on how renting from developers is kind of a shocking way to do, or an uncomfortable way to do farming, because possibly the developers don't care too much about the land, other than the resale price. Owen also mentioned how speculation on land, has a detrimental effect on the quality of the land and the soil. So that was, again, I was wondering myself if there could be some incentive to the landowners to have that land, sequester its carbon. Would that be a way to get government to support regenerative farming for just people who are owning the land? So that it would,
I can speak.
Ultimately its value wouldn't just depend on its resale later on, but also
Turn off on me.
the land.
Yeah. So we find, somebody, what happened there? I don't know. Are you going to talk? Anyways, Isaac is on my screen, but I don't hear him. So just keep going, I guess.
Yeah,
so pension plans are a big problem. Pension plans are a big problem in Ontario because they're one of the biggest land speculators in Ontario. So I think the big thing is you got to follow like Manitoba's doing and banning pension plans from land speculation. And that means you got to get to the government of Ontario. So that's one big thing. There has to be some incentive on rented land, because when you're renting a land and you're a farmer and you're renting, say 100 acres or 200 acres, you're not invested in that land, and the homeowners need to have an awareness. And some of these homeowners don't even know that there is programs, or there is maybe some things that they could ask the farmer to do, maybe do regenerative agriculture. So there has to be kind of a reconnection or a re-education of landowners to understand what regenerative agriculture is and the benefits to their land, rather than just raping it, taking everything off. So like I said, there's lots of things, and that's what the NFU is trying to do, is trying to reconnect landowners with the power of why they should have their farms regenerative land. And here's something really interesting. You know that the land rental prices closest to the GTA are the cheapest. So you can rent probably 200, 300 acres or 1,000 acres within regional Peel for probably anywhere between $150 to $200 an acre. But as you go further out into the farming communities, as you go out to Wingham, that land starts raising up to $300 to $400 per acre. So the value, farmers, there isn't just enough farmers around here. So rented land is relatively inexpensive, if not free, especially if a developer owns it. He doesn't really care about what happens to the land. So it's just a shame.
Okay, thank you.
And I think,
Go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, I think there is some opportunities within some of the publicly owned land in Ontario where you could do demonstration projects of some of the types of things that Owen and Isaac and Leah have talked about, to show farmers how it's done, what the benefits are. Like I think of the Rouge National Urban Park, for example, in York and Durham. A lot of that land is, there's huge tracts of land that's publicly owned. The leases have been 1-to-1 year leases since 40 years, right? Whereas that doesn't encourage that long-term type of mindset. So I think there's lots of opportunities where both for the private land that is rented, but the public land that's being farmed, to show some of those demonstration opportunities as well. That isn't happening right now.
Yeah, thank you.
I know, oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
know we're super short on time, but there was a question from someone named Hasnain about, do you think that small scale community gardens growing veg and annual fruits are effective ways to start and educate communities? And this came after, I think, most of the questions came.
Yes, yeah, I saw that. Yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to talk about, I just want to say yes to that question. I do think that community gardens are a really great place for people to start. I didn't start at a community garden because I was really lucky that my parents have a backyard. So that's where I started gardening. But any place where people can get their hands in the dirt, I think is a really great opportunity to get them more involved in the food system.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for bringing that one up. Yeah, otherwise, I think we've reached out to, I've mentioned the people that I've seen in the chat. So if there's anybody else at this last minute who wants to put their mic on and ask a question, if that's possible, or just pop it in the chat, we could address that now.
Okay.
Oh, Hassan is saying this about the community garden in Peel Region since 2019, providing food to food banks. Wonderful. Can we encourage faith-based businesses, homeowners to start growing and contributing? I love that idea.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is yes, absolutely. Let's do it. I just wanted to note we are at 8:48. I wanted to give one last chance to any of the panelists if there's anything left over that you guys want to comment on, and then we will say good night to everyone.
And thank you so much for participating, and for everybody who stayed on for the discussion to add their voice to this conversation. We so appreciate it.
Is there anything else you guys want to talk about or touch on?
No, we're well covered.
Awesome.
Okay, well, again, thank you everyone for participating. We wholeheartedly appreciate all of your comments and everything that you've shared with us. And we just want to let everybody know that we will be sending a follow-up email to everybody who registered, and there will be the link to this panel discussion, as well as all of the links that we discussed within it. So that could be a great resource for everybody in the end. So just keep your eyes out for it. Should be over in the next couple of days. And we'll just sign off and thank Eco Caledon again for partnering with us on this film screening and panel discussion. So have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, Aliyah. Thanks, Isaac, Carolyn, Owen. Everyone have a fantastic night.